Hey, so here's something I found the other day that I quite liked. The old the old and bold software engineers will remember Joel on software, right? And back in 2000, 21 years ago, Joel published a thing called the Joel test, right? 12 steps to better code, and it was essentially a list of 12 things that were yes/no questions, and you were aiming for a score where you answered yes with nearly all of them right. It was a super simple way of judging whether or not you were doing the right stuff to build good software, right? And the other day I found an article basically trying to do the same thing for remote teams. So this is the Joel test for remote teams. The original article is actually offline now, right? But I'll link to a kind of mirror of it. This is quite a good idea. If you want a really simple health check of whether or not your company is doing a good job of being a remote company, this is a good starting point, right? Answer yes, no to each of these questions, or even better, rate yourself on a scale of 0 to 10 for each of these questions, and sum up the score. And if it's the ideal score would be, I guess, 120, right? But the questions are really interesting, right? Because they're pretty simple. And that's why I like them. They're a really simple way of measuring like some of the basic competencies of remote working. It's obviously a lot more complex to measure actually, are you a good distributed company? But this is a great place to start. So to go through them quickly, do you have a company handbook? Yes or no? That's super necessary as a remote team. You need a place for people to come and find out the core information about the company asynchronously. Do you have a communications guide? As in stuff that tells you about how you should communicate and where you should talk about what medium you should use, when should you use Slack, what channels you should use, whatever. Do you always turn your video on calls? That's like a super big indicator for me when I've worked with teams. Almost inevitably, teams where people don't usually turn their video on are less good at many areas of remote working. Do you record and share your all hands meetings so that people who can't attend them can see them after the fact asynchronously? Does everybody dial into video calls on a separate screen? So you've got none of that stuff where you've got, me here on the screen and some other person's head here, right? Do you enable work visibility and sharing as a default process? So do you publish everyone's work somehow or make it visible in Notion or on Google Docs or on whatever platform you use? Can everyone see the work that's being done? Do you share working hours and normalize ignoring notifications outside of them? That speaks to whether or not you look after people's personal health, which is hard in distributed teams. Do you screen for self-motivation and communication during hiring? This is a huge one for me, and I'll do some more videos on this, particularly communication. I think that there's certain core skills that are really necessary when hiring for remote workers, and they have to do with self-motivation, personal routines and habits, communication, and those are perhaps much more important in remote teams than they are in co-located teams. Do you provide co-working or home office stipend? Again, for me, if you're a remote company, you can't expect your employees to buy all of their desk equipment and proper chairs, and if you don't do this, you should, because otherwise you're going to get people working at laptops hunched over their kitchen table, and they're going to get back problems and all sorts. Do you schedule time for team socialization? This happens naturally in a lot of co-located companies. In a remote team, it doesn't, so you have to make it a priority. And do you have at least one on-site per year? COVID at the moment means that's pretty difficult to do, but again, as a fully distributed company, I would say that it's a good idea to get everyone together in person once a year, or once every 18 months. So COVID kind of puts this last one into question, but if you want a simple way of judging whether or not you're doing well as a distributed company, answering yes or no, or rating 0 to 10 for each of these questions will give you an idea of that. And there's a link here to a Remote Tools article, which is contains all of these things, but isn't the original source because the original source is offline.